I'll stick to my script in case I actually say something that might really, really offend somebody. So, Ciara, many political leaders reacted to the horrific attack on the children last Thursday by saying it was a shock attack that no one could have seen coming. Of course, this is untrue. Most of us, with our heads not buried in the sand, knew this was coming. Many Irish people have been unhappy with this state of affairs for some time. They have made their views known in dozens of peaceful protests and walks across the country, hundreds and thousands of ordinary men, women and children using their voice in the only way they have available to them, democratically and legally protesting assembly. These people have no seat at the table. They do not have an ear for their ideological captured political representatives. They do not sit on company boards or run highly funded NGOs. They have no master in political science in Trinity. They're just ordinary Irish families. So, of course, the government ignored them. But when people are denied meaningful dialogue around concerns which they know are reasonable, they are driven into unreasonableness. The explosion of unrest last week was the pressure release valve bursting, because this government has done everything in its power to craft and maintain a social environment where the discussion of its own failings in the area of immigration is taboo. It has been a marvellous piece of propaganda, but the gig is up now. The genie is out of the bottle and there's no putting it back. And so the government will slip the mask and resort to the state's monopoly on force to enforce ideological orthodoxy through its hate speech legislation. And now the eyes of the world are on Ireland. I do not believe the government truly knows how much of a turning point this is. I fear for what will happen, but let it be known that there were many chances for things to go differently, and you didn't do it. And tomorrow's motion by Fine Gael is nothing short of disgraceful. The first mention of their victims is on the very last line of their motion. The very last line of their motion. I think it's absolutely disgraceful and just political theatre.
All members rose this morning to speak about Trashonan and her fantastic legacy and her contribution to this House. And our thoughts and prayers and sympathies are with her family. And as I said at the outset, I will propose a motion at the end of order of business. And just want to thank members for the lovely words and stories they've recounted about her service and just interacting with her and her sister on a personal basis and on a work basis as well. And we will, I'm sure, have an opportunity at a later stage to have more full statements in her memory and with her family hopefully in attendance as well. Senator Dooley spoke this morning, as did pretty much all other senators, about what are now being, I think, called the Dublin riots, for want of a better phrase, but the events of last Thursday and what happened in our capital city. And I want to agree with Senator Flynn when I think you said, Senator, that all of us across the country were deeply upset by what we saw, because it's our capital, whether we live here or work here or not. It's the country's capital city and it reflects on all of us, and I think we were all deeply saddened by what we saw on Thursday. I myself was in the capital on Thursday night. I wouldn't usually be here. I was on the streets when we got word that I got a message that the house was being evacuated. I rang the gate. This house wasn't evacuated at that point, but Ag House and Kildare House were asking staff to leave at 4 p.m. So there was certainly, I think, an appreciation at that stage in the day that something was brewing. And staff were very worried and were awaiting instructions. And as one person said to me, that there was roving gangs on the streets of Dublin. So I got off the streets, didn't come back into the office, because I was, for the first time ever, genuinely frightened being up here, and got back to the hotel as quick as I could. And I could smell the burning on the streets as I walked back to the hotel. It's a day I don't think I'll ever forget. And there were people running down Nassau Street. It was just remarkable. So I want to just pay tribute, and I know we'll have a chance tomorrow during the Fine Gael private member slot to discuss this more fully, but I just want to pay tribute to the members of An Garda Síochána that were on the streets that night and that responded to the call for backup, to back up their colleagues who were in trouble, because it must have been, whatever about the rest of us on the streets, it must have been truly frightening for the Gardaí that took to the streets to protect all of us and to restore order, which they did. And in incredibly challenging circumstances, and I'm sure their families were equally as concerned for their safety. So it was an extraordinary night for all of the wrong reasons. And I didn't disagree with much that was said across the House, even though there are different perspectives. Most of what was said, I think, is true. And I think we're all united in utter condemnation for the violence we saw. And I would agree with Senator Fitzpatrick that the events and those poor children, and I believe one girl, it's been reported she has sustained catastrophic injuries and is still receiving treatment. And the other 2 children have been released, thankfully, and their carer is still in hospital. So our thoughts are first and foremost with those children and their families and the school community at Coláiste Gaelscoil on Parnell Square. I think they will recover from this, but they are recovering from what is a very traumatic situation. So we are all united in condemning what happened on Thursday night. And there will be an opportunity tomorrow, and I'm sure over the coming days and weeks ahead there will be more conversations, and there are questions to be answered, that is for sure. And I have no doubt that the Minister and the Commissioner will be forthcoming in answering those questions. And there are reasonable questions to be asked and answered, and that will happen. And the public will want reassurance on that front. And I would agree with the comments as well that, whilst we had far-right elements or people motivated by far-right ideology, certainly from some of the stuff I saw online, there was a lot of racism and hatred that was fueling what happened. But then there were others that were brought along on the night for whatever reason. And ultimately, I think the points made by Senator Ruan as well around communities feeling disenfranchised. I mean, people don't act like that from nowhere, but at the same time, the law is the law, and we can't condone the looting of businesses. I'm not sure what somebody was trying to achieve by stealing runners out of Foot Locker or Asics or wherever. That certainly wasn't in solidarity with the children that were stabbed that day. So there's a lot to process for us as a country, I think, in the coming days and weeks ahead, and we will do that. And we will need to see, I think, some more detail from the Commissioner and from the Minister on that front. And I note the comments of Senator Dooley, and I'm sure that is shared by many as well. And I also note that others don't agree with that. But there will be a role, I think, for reassuring Gardaí. And I would agree, Senator, that the Gardaí are afraid to act and to protect themselves. And in some ways, we know that many of the newly trained Gardaí are sent first to Dublin. So, it's a pretty intense situation to have to deal with, and it requires specific training to deal with those types of situations. And we will need to reassess that, because ultimately Gardaí have to be kept safe in order to keep the rest of us safe. So I think I'll leave it at that. We will have an opportunity tomorrow to have more full discussions, and we will hear from the Minister and the Commissioner as well in due course. And my understanding is that both have been invited to the Oireachtas Justice Committee. So even if you're not a member of the committee, members will have an opportunity to attend there as well.